All right, I'm going to do some brush cleaning here and try out a few different products on a few different types of brushes in different stages of use. So since this is an experiment, I'm going to work with some older damaged brushes and see what happened. You can see how the top is kind of frayed. There's some paint stuck in probably close to the ferrule, which is kind of separating them. And I'm going to work with a couple of different products to see what I get the best results with. So this is something new I haven't used before. It appears to be a little bit dangerous, so I'm going to be careful with what I do. I'm also going to try some vinegar, and I'll come back to that other product again so you can see it. Here it is. You can see I've written a note to myself on there not to put it in plastic, so I'm using a glass jar because I want to make sure that I don't use something that will dissolve from the solvent itself. I'm putting a little bit in the bottom of the jar. I want to have enough to cover the bristles without going into the ferrule or dissolving the glue. Remember, it's glue that holds the hairs of the bristles into the ferrule part of the brush before the handle. And if I don't have, if I allow the solvent, I'm afraid it may dissolve the glue. I'm going to set the brush in here. This is very stiff, this brush, so I can see what will happen to it. I'm going to add a little bit more solution because I want to make sure that I have the bristles covered. So this is Winsor & Newton Brush Cleaner and Restorer. You can see I'm just adding it to the jar. And these are old brushes with a lot of stiff paint stuck in them. I'm also going to try some vinegar, see what happens with that. I'll do something similar, put it into a glass jar, let it soak a little bit, and then we'll come back to it and see what is happening. So I don't know if you can tell, the solution in the bottom of this jar is starting to just pick up a little bit of color from the old paint that's dissolving. And I'm going to try one more technique, and that is boiled water. And I'm going to use this in combination with the others. So I just took a glass jar, put it into the microwave with some water. I had to boil it about 5 minutes to get it into a really rolling boil. And then I've brought it in here. I'm using the towel around it just to protect my hands. And I want to see what will happen as I work with it. So you can see the solution again is changing color, much more on the brush cleaner and restorer than what's happening with the vinegar. But I am getting a little bit of a shift from the vinegar too. I'm going to try this Cake Lavender and Oil soap. It's very similar to the Masters brush cleaner soap. If you've used that before, it just smells a little better. And so I'm just I put it into one of these old plastic containers, and I'm just working up a really good lather with it. After I'm done taking these through the cleaning process, I'm going to try some different materials for conditioning the brushes. I'm going to use some linseed oil in one case, see what happens and how well that holds it. So you can kind of see, again, these are the condition that my brushes are in prior to doing these different techniques to them. And I'm back at the vinegar, seeing what's happening, and then I'm trying this with the brush cleaner solution. Okay, so these are my brushes I cleaned with the lavender cake soap. And now I'm going to try just dipping them into the boiling water for a few moments to see what happens. I'm leaving this in real time just so you can see how long it takes. So I'm just kind of holding it in there. Again, I'm being careful not to put the place where the bristles meet the ferrule because I don't want to melt the glue that's holding them in there. I'm just going to do it right up to the place where the ferrule meets the bristles. And I end up dipping it a few times, but I'm really surprised at how well this boiling water works. I think it works better when it's very hot, so I did go and reheat the water at one point in the process here. I want to leave the real time, but I'll try to zoom in too so you can see what they look like. Okay, and now that I have them clean and they've been through the boiling water, I'm going to do an experiment with the egg whites. So I just took the egg out. I'm kind of using a little bit of the egg white left in here. And I'm going to condition some of the others with the linseed oil. So my purpose here is to help the bristles stay in place as they dry until I'm ready to use them again. Linseed oil, of course, I'm not worried about that at all in terms of mixing with the paint when I start it. I think that the egg white amount is going to be so small that it will be okay, but I will probably dip the brush into the Gamsol before I get going again. So this one, you can see how much better the bristles look on it. They really are holding together. And I think that's part of what has to happen, right? Because they kind of get out of shape and move in different directions. So I'm going to try it and see which works better. On the other brush, I used the linseed oil. So on this one, I'm going to try the egg white. Right, I'm going to do the same thing with a few more brushes and then try my next solution for cleaning, and that is Dawn dishwashing liquid. Let's see what happens with that. So I save all kinds of plastic lids and containers because I find they come in handy for all kinds of things. So I just added a little bit of water to the Dawn, and now I'm mixing it up, and then I'm going to try putting it into the boiling water and see what happens with that. The only one of these that I think isn't a huge improvement is the one up at the top, and that's the one I use the egg white. I want to try something else with the egg white here, so I'm going to take two brushes. I'm sorry this is a little bit out of the camera, but you'll see it. I took like something that has kind of the hardness or stiffness of an index card, and after cleaning both of the brushes with the Dawn and then dipping one into the egg white and then into the boiling water, and this second one here that's a little bit fatter, I'm dipping into the boiling water, and then I'm going to put it into the linseed oil, and then I'm clipping both of them into that card and allowing them to dry with some support to keep the bristles together. Just taking a look at how these brushes are doing, I think you can see they are looking remarkably better. So you can see the brushes still look pretty good. Some are better than others. That brush with the yellow band on it is a less expensive synthetic brush to begin with, but they all have, even when I kind of feel them, the bristles have some movement, they're still soft, and they're still holding together. So I'm very pleased with what is happening for the most part. And then looking at the solution, you can see more of the paint is coming out than was coming out yesterday. If I look at the brush itself, then this brush really was needing some work. You can see there's still paint in it. It's obviously coming through. And if I kind of dab it here on the towel, you can see that more of it is coming out. This is supposed to be very toxic. I'm a little bit scared of it, but I think just handling it carefully and being aware of what I'm doing with it and where I put it and having some ventilation while I'm using it should all make this worthwhile. Yeah, it is very interesting to me how much paint continues to come out of this. And I assume it's all paint, but you can also see that the brush is pretty flexible. After yesterday, when I initially started to clean it, this was a very stiff brush. So you can see there's a lot of movement there now. And as I continue to dab it into the solution and then onto the paper towel, it really is removing quite a bit of material. So just be sure and use this somewhere that you have good ventilation. I really did not notice any smell from it that I was a little bit surprised about because I'm very sensitive to smells. But I don't know if it actually still contained something and I just couldn't tell, or if it was not too bad. But really, look, that is amazing. Look at the paint that's come out of that brush. And it still has good movement and flexibility. I'm really very impressed. So now that I have taken it out of the solution, I'm going to use that lavender soap. I've added a little bit of water into the sides of the plastic container so I can really kind of scrub it. And I'm going to keep this in real time for a minute so you can see how long I'm actually working on it to kind of work up the lather. I have heard people talk about the kind of meditative experience at the end of their painting session where they just sort of space and do the brush cleaning for the things that they've worked with, and they do this sort of thorough cleaning every time. I usually have just been doing them in the Gamsol. All right, so now I'm going to take a look at the brushes that I had in the vinegar. And certainly I'm not getting the kind of paint coming out, and the brush still feels very stiff as well. I can feel paint in the bristles, kind of. And these have been sitting overnight as well, just like the stuff that was in the solution. I'll try washing it as well and see what happens with that. Maybe the vinegar has kind of softened up the paint or the brushes, and maybe it will come out now. And certainly the advantage to the vinegar is that it is a less toxic substance. So maybe on a regular basis, it would be good to use that. Try this again with another brush, see if it's any different. And speed it up a little bit, but yeah, it's definitely stiffer. And you can see, maybe you can't see, but there's still some paint stuck in it. Definitely did not remove the paint. I'm going to try putting that one into the solution and see what happens. Okay, so if you look at the vinegar, you can see there really isn't much paint that's come out. It's a slightly different color, but not too much at all. I'm going to take the two brushes that I have cleaned, one in the vinegar and one in the other solution. I'm going to wash them again, and then I'm going to take my boiling water jar and reheat that so that I can kind of do the final step of the boiling water. So my water's nice and hot. I did speed this up so that it doesn't take too long, but just consider the fact that I'm going twice as fast as you can see here. So I really am just amazed at how well this is working. I am dipping it in and holding it again so that it doesn't end up where the glue would melt where the bristles go into the ferrule. So I'm being careful to do it on top. It is a little bit splayed still, but I am just amazed at how much this brush was totally stiff and the paint was quite caked in it. I'm going to put a little bit of linseed oil on it, see how that does for conditioning it. I'm going to do the same thing with my other brush. Now this one is a much stiffer brush, remember. Part of that is the bristles that it's made of. It could be the age, it's very old. I've probably had this brush 30 years, so I do like it for scumbling though, so having some brushes that are stiff is not bad. This is another brush I soaked in the solution, and it's a super soft synthetic brush. It's more often classified as an acrylic brush. I just want to see what happens with this one, and you saw how it was kind of splayed, and now look at what happens when I put it in the boiling water. Really, it really is amazing. I do find that some of the hairs are a little bit loose, and you can see at the tip they're coming out just a little bit, but it is definitely much better and would work nicely as a soft blending brush. Let's take a look at what happened with the brushes that I folded in the card here. Remember, one we used egg whites on and one was the oil. So this is my egg white brush, and really it looks great. The bristles are holding together very well. It feels a little bit stiff. I'm not sure how that would affect the painting, particularly because of how it will mix with the oil, but it feels stiff like a surface stick. So if I go in here with the boiling water, it does seem to get a little bit better. And of course, I'd be using probably at some point dipping it into the Gamsol again. So really, I think it looks terrific. I'm very pleased. And this is the one that had the oil on it. You can see that because of the oil that leaked through the card. This is great. Just it has a softness to it. It doesn't have a stiffness like the egg white. And I imagine it's probably conditioning. So the egg white may be more effective if you're trying to reshape a brush. Looks like my best results have been with the brush cleaner and restorer combined with the boiling water and then the linseed oil. All right, I have something else I want to try putting on the brushes. Softening, smoothing, and protecting cream. This is hair cream. So I have a little container. I'm going to squirt a little bit of the hair softening product into the little jar. Now I could probably do a whole other test of different hair products. This is just one that I happen to have on hand. So I am dipping the brush into the boiling water again, getting it kind of smoothed out, and then I'm going to put a little bit of the hair cream on it and let it dry and see what happens. I'm going to try this with a couple more brushes too, just to see what happens. So this is a rosemary brush I ordered, and you might have heard of the rosemary brushes. They're really wonderful. This one was damaged in the shipping, so it was really kind of misshapen. And I'm wondering if the boiling water will help it to come back into place. So once again, I'm being careful not to melt the glue where the bristles meet the ferrule. These brushes are not inexpensive, but I am so far really loving them. I just started using them a few months ago. I'd heard people speak about them, and I think it's quite worth all the hype. They're manufactured in the UK, although there is at least one distributor in the US that I have used. I'm sure there's others as well. So I'm keeping this in real time for a few minutes just so you can see how long I'm leaving it in here. And these sort of repeated dippings do seem to make a difference. I think you can see the brush seems to be coming back into shape. I'm really amazed. The brush has a little bit of stain on it because I tried painting with it once just to see if I use the oil paint medium on it, if it would kind of smooth out a little bit, and it really didn't make any difference. So I called Rosemary and they were kind enough to order a new brush for me. But I'm trying this to see what will happen. So you can see there's a little bit of flaring, but every time I do it and put it back into the water, it does get a little bit better. So I get it as smooth as I can, and then I'm going to take that hair cream that I had and just dip it into here and see what happens if I let it sit with a little bit of the hair cream on it. I'm just kind of smoothing it, and I'm doing this repeatedly just to help it come back into shape. It's really almost holding just as it is. So, and again, this is the rosemary. So I skipped ahead, but I really stroked and smoothed that brush for a good minute. And then you can see I'm taking an index card. I've placed it into that. I'm kind of rolling it around to hold it into place. And then I'm using one of the little clips on the edge of it. So we'll see what happens with this. I'm very curious to see how it comes out. Let's take a look the next day. All right, here we are. Doing this with one hand. Wow, look at that. Amazing. I thought this was a goner. I do want to try Murphy's oil soap too. I know a lot of people use that to clean their brushes, so I will include that in my repertoire of things that I'm checking out. This is another brush with a lot of paint in it. I'm going to put this one in the solution too, just to see what we get. So you all have heard me speak about the Ebony Splendor brushes. I have a few of the small size. They are super reasonably priced. I usually get them at Jerry's. It may be their store brand. I really like the way they work, but they do, the small ones particularly, do tend to get kind of frazzled. So I'm wondering how it's going to work for the small Ebony Splendors. These are, I have a bunch of small flats and brights I'm going to try it on. So I've dipped it repeatedly. I used the hair cream repeatedly. I spent some time smoothing it like I did with the others. Doesn't seem to be making a big difference. But I'm going to try it. I'm going to try some with egg white, some with oil, some with hair cream, and see what happens if I leave them overnight and come back to it. I'm also going to try it with a small Kolinsky sable. So you can see this is a really small round, probably a 0 or a 00. And I have dipped it into the boiling water, and now I'm also dipping it into the oil and kind of smoothing it. It looks like it came together really nicely. I'm repeating the process, but it has a nice point that it came to right away. Different than what happened with the Ebony Splendor. So this is the next day. And you can see the two on the far left are two Kolinsky sable brushes. So those are not synthetics, they're natural hair, and they're a different shape. They came out quite well. And the one on the third one in from the left, I don't know what it is, I can't read it, but the others next to it are all the Ebony Splendors, and you can see that they are all pretty frazzled. So apparently it doesn't work well to try to restore these. However, I still recommend them. You can get a good deal of painting out of them. I think you just need to throw them away when they end up getting too frazzled to use. I have another sample pack called Creative Mark Black Swan brushes, so I'm just curious about what will happen with these. Interestingly, when I was dipping them in the boiling water, they looked like they were working a lot better. I was kind of smoothing it out, and I added a little bit of oil, just like I did with the Ebony Splendors, and they seem to be going into shape. I tried it with two different sizes. Sadly, when I looked at it the next day, this was what they both looked like. So apparently these small synthetic brushes are great for their initial use, but then not so good if you try to restore them. So here's a brief description of what I do at the end of every painting session. First, I wipe as much paint as I can get off my brush onto a rag or paper towel. I just do that with the brush dry right onto the paper towel. And then once I get that off, I dip it into the Turpenoid or Gamsol and then continue wiping until I don't see any more paint coming off. I don't wash my brushes with water at the end of every session. I find the brushes fray. Some people do. It hasn't been my practice, and I seem to have better luck when I don't. And just to show you how I end up dealing with the Turpenoid or Gamsol at the end. So here's my container I've been using to clean my brush while I've been painting, to sort of, again, even then I wipe most of the paint off and then dip it in here to get the last bit of it off. So at the end of the painting session, I remove the little basket that's been holding the brush above the Turpenoid, and I'm pouring it into the glass jar you can see there on the table. I'm just showing you this, the bottom of the Turpenoid container, and how sort of thick and how much paint gathers there. I'll generally take a paper towel and clean out the very last of it and any residue from the paint that's left after I get as much as possible into the jar. And then I cap the jar, and I'm going to set that aside for a couple days. This is just to show you what the inside of the jar looks like once you empty the terpenoid or Gamsol. You can see it's really very coated with the paint. But here it is after a couple days, and I'm going to take the jar and I'm going to pour it into my container, and look how amazingly clean that is. As long 24 hours, it'll still be a little bit cloudy, but if you can give it a couple days, it'll work really well. And you can see you have to kind of be careful as you get closer to the bottom. It'll get a little bit cloudier, so I usually don't pour in the very last of it. So here is my last recap on cleaning. While I'm painting, I wipe the brush with paint on a rag or a paper towel. I dip it in the Gamsol or terpenoid, and I wipe it on a rag again until it's clean. This is especially important if you're changing colors, and especially if you're going from a darker color to a lighter color. When I'm finished painting, I do the same thing, but I add the last step, which is the linseed oil and reshaping the brush. If you do use water for cleaning at the end of your painting session, I would suggest the lavender soap, the linseed oil, and then reshaping the brush. And finally, for older brushes, you can't beat that Winsor & Newton brush cleaner and restorer. And I would follow it with the lavender soap, the boiling water, the linseed oil, and the reshaping of the brushes. And a final word on the brushes. Buy the best quality you can afford, but try a few different kinds. Oftentimes there are less expensive brushes like those Ebony Splendors that worked really well. Art supply stores often have sample packs. You can try out different brushes. Be careful with that solution because you can end up with something like this. And lastly, remember the smaller brushes are a lot less expensive than the larger brushes, so it's really worthwhile to put your money into good brushes like the Rosemary's or a Kolinsky Sable when you're buying the small brushes where you might need more control. Thanks for watching, and happy painting!